everyone, welcome to another episode of Get Jasched. I am your host, Jess Jasch. Before we get into today's episode, there are two just small little announcements I want to make. One is if you are in Brisbane or wanting to visit sunny Brisbane, sunny, humid Brisbane, I am holding an in-person workshop for business owners and directors on Friday morning, the 24th of April, called Resilient Leaders, Resilient Teams. And in that 3 hours, I am going to take you through the nervous system of a leader, and you will walk away with tools on how to understand your own nervous system and responses in terms of stress, in terms of heightened emotional anything, regardless of whether it's got to do with workplace stress or not. But you're going to take away an understanding of that, what you can do about it for yourself, and then also how you can apply it as a leader to and with your team. So that is on Friday the 24th of April in Brisbane. I'm going to include the registration link below. It is limited to 14 people only in the space that we have. So it's in Brisbane City. Come join me if that suits you. And the second announcement is a little bit of a preemptive announcement. It's a little bit of a tease, I guess. I am planning something that I'm going to announce soon. I don't have a date of when I'm announcing it, just because I want to get some pieces together, but it is going to be a tool to help people like you, business leaders, owners, directors, to find their own ways of practicing, your own ways of practicing some of these mindfulness tools or meditation tools that we've been talking about. I'm going to provide a solution for that, because a lot of business owners struggle with how to actually do this. So there is something coming that I'm in the process of creating that is soon going to be an option for you as well. So stay tuned. All of that being said, today we're going back to my roots of communication. So some of you may not know, my undergrad degrees, 2 of them, because I thought that was a good idea halfway through the first one. My undergrad degrees are in communication and public relations. And when I added the PR degree to it, I have different language of how I explain this now, because I didn't know I was autistic at the time. But when I approached public relations, I didn't approach it from the perspective of being a spin doctor or anything like that. Not that they are, but we know that PR gets a bit of a bad rap, doesn't necessarily have the greatest PR itself. But I took it very literally in the wording of public relations. How do we relate to the public? How do we relate to people? How do we communicate with people? So I don't know if that kind of just shines a whole new light on me for you and where I come from in the sense of how I view things, because that is very literally how the rest of my business has gone, is how are we relating to ourselves and to each other? All of that being said, with that experience, that degree in comms and corporate communication experience, that's really what bridged the gap between my initial mindfulness learnings and qualifications in yoga and things like that to now, or for the last 7-8 years of really applying those actual skills to how we communicate in the workplace. So that's just a quick kind of historical summary for you. But today I want to really talk about it, because everything that I've spoken about, specifically in the last couple of episodes for sure, because it all relates to leaders and how they lead and how they communicate as leaders. Everything I ever talk about is about how leaders steer the ship And leaders have the authority to influence decision making and influence the culture. Even though everyone does influence the culture, leaders have the authority to make decisions that impact systemically on the culture. And one of those things that isn't necessarily a decision making element, but it is an authority in terms of the power balance of leadership, is how leaders communicate, but also how they understand communication in a world where we are all fucking overwhelmed. There's a lot going on. We're not going to deny that. We're not going to get into the details because while I am starting to be more and more convinced that maybe I should have studied something around geopolitical science and military studies because it is my special interest, and maybe I would then get paid for that too. This isn't the place for that. But we can acknowledge here that there is a lot going on and a lot that feels overwhelming and stressful, more so in different areas of the world, in different countries, with other things going on. But I know for sure here, it's pretty stressful. It's pretty overwhelming, and that's, it's a lot. So we're still having to show up to work and function, and we're still having to be functional human beings in some way. And it, there is this element of empathy that I've spoken about where we can be functional, we can acknowledge and then be functional enough, because if we take ourselves out, even if we're not directly impacted, even though our hearts and our spirits might be impacted, we may not be directly impacted by some of these events personally ourselves. So if we take ourselves out by letting the overwhelm get to us, we're actually not helpful, in terms of the community or socially that is needed to help support maybe some of these other communities. But all in all, we're still showing up to work. We're still doing the thing. We're still dealing with, at the very least in business, we're still dealing with the awareness of economic stress and uncertainty that is coming along more and more and more so, particularly with recent events. So that is all to say, there is an element of overwhelm that is happening, and it's not just leaders who are feeling it, but it's their teams who are feeling it. So how do leaders navigate that for themselves, but also help their teams to navigate it? Because we know that when everyone is stressed, and let's bring it into like a micro, let's remove it from the macro for a moment, because we know it's a lot, but let's bring it into the micro and think about within the ecosystem of the workplace and the jobs that are needing to be done. Do you ever notice how communication is one of the things that falls apart first when everyone's stressed the fuck out? I've noticed that. I notice that I struggle, if I'm stressed, I sometimes need to just blur and word vomit and be able to talk through something. Or other times I know that when I'm stressed, I'm more sensitive. I have less of a window of tolerance for bullshit or what I perceive as bullshit in the moment, at least. I'll concede that. But in terms of group dynamics in workplaces, we know that people will talk over each other or misinterpret things, or the group threads, whether they're group chats like Slack or Teams or however, I don't know, however you use it, or email threads start to spiral. You can kind of see, like spikes coming out in different ways. But also on a functional level, teams themselves, not teams, the product, teams themselves feel confused, are generally confused even when the information is still being technically shared adequately. There is still confusion. There is still stress can just cause confusion and through no fault of their own, even sometimes it can contribute to people not understanding what is going on, even if the information is there, because stress will do funny, stupid things to us. So when we are overwhelmed, when we are stressed, when there is this version of collective something, our brains will process less information, or what feels like less information. So when it comes to leadership and how you communicate, even though there is an element of stress that will naturally come along with leadership too, that is normal, your job isn't just about making the message clear, it is about understanding what might be getting in the way to help guide and lead your people, or even yourself, along the way to that clarity through the cognitive load, through the overwhelm, through the stress. So there's a theory called cognitive load theory, and this can help explain why communication does break down under stress. And part of that is our working memory can only hold a limited amount of information at once. So, when you're really just focused on getting something done, let's say it's a project and there's so much to consider, and maybe you have a lot of different plates spinning. Maybe whether you're aware of it at the time or not, maybe you are retroactively aware of, I just can't take in anything else. It's a little bit like business owners who are a little bit just overwhelmed with all of the shoulds they should be doing between marketing and tech stacking and all these buzzwords. And sometimes you're just like, I don't have capacity to learn another fucking thing. I just need to be able to do the thing that I'm here to do. That definitely came from me a little bit. But I know a lot of people experience that. So our working memory can only hold a limited amount of information at once, or new information at once. So that load can influence that. And when our stress is high, or our feeling of overwhelm is high, the available mental bandwidth shrinks. It gets tiny, or smaller at least. Our overwhelm can also reduce our comprehension of things, our memory of things, our decision-making ability. It can impact our reactivity to things when we might not comprehend it properly. So our frustration can spike out. And for leaders, when people are overloaded, no matter how much you explain in a lengthy manner, and I am one who could be accused of being an over communicator. But you know what? Personally, as someone who needs things like, tell me what you literally want, or if you have something in mind, tell me exactly what you mean, because it's easier to just understand what you want and then go from there, and then innovate from there or whatever. But I could be accused of being an over communicator for sure, but I will also take that over under communication, because sometimes you just need to know the specifics. But having said that, this awareness of when people are overloaded, those long explanations don't land. Those step-by-step instructions, whether they're complex or simple and just many, they're not there. They get forgotten, even if they are in front of your face in email. They get forgotten. People don't follow it. People don't think to go back to it. People default to reactive behavior rather than proactive. So, if it's your team and you send out a reminder of, hey, remember to get this done. They're like, how do I do that again? And they might, again, this is very frustrating for leaders, I get, or people who run this, but they might reply to you and go, how do I get that? How do I do that again? Instead of going to where they know you have provided that information. And for example, what that does is it increases the frustration for the person who has provided this information before. So it increases their workload and frustration, because it's like, I've given this to you several times. Here it is. It's right here. It's in this folder. It's here, whatever it is. Here's the email I sent, all the information. But it also, so it's adding on to the workload of the leader who has provided that, but it is also making the other, not through your fault necessarily, but it's making the other person or other people feel like they don't have the information they need, because we miss the details. So when we are overwhelmed, sometimes we need to look at what is more important, clarity or details. And while details in different contexts, in different industries, in different areas are important, clarity is sometimes what we need to pave that way through. And then we also, when we see stress in one person or in a few people in teams, we see this spread of stress in teams because there's this contagion effect that can happen because people automatically mirror each other's emotional stress states. Generally speaking, we have things like mirror neurons at play. We have elements of us wanting to fit in as a society. We also just have this unscientifically worded vibes that don't pass the vibe check. And what that does is just means that it can influence your tone of voice, your facial expression, your posture, your pace of your speech, can influence how other people feel, or vice versa. And you might have team members, if they're in person, right, sitting near someone who's always sighing and always going, maybe to themselves, but that can be really distracting and influencing on the people around them. And while there's a lesson in there especially for people who maybe aren't as experienced, to learn how to navigate those, and they don't always have to jump and be like, what's wrong? Is everything okay? La la la. I've had to go through this experience when I was much younger as well. Sometimes we need to also be on top of it as leaders, because there are things at play that are going to make that extra hard for people around them, no matter their experience or not, whether they are maybe like me, an autistic ADHD, one or the other or both. And that becomes just an unavoidable distraction, or for whatever other reason. So there's all of these awarenesses that how things can influence the team and then ripple through the team, because anxiety will spread quickly, but regulating practices will also spread well and quickly. And regulated nervous systems don't mean, we're calm. It means we are regulated even in the face of challenge or stress. So as a leader, again, people don't just listen to what you say. You are in that influential, you have the authority to influence position of how you behave and how you show up, and the tiny little choices you make, which means, yes, you are making extra energy, you're using extra energy to do this, but the tiny little choices you make will influence and model for people based on how you are being. They will respond to your emotional state. They will respond to your ability to regulate even in the challenge. Remember, that doesn't mean calm, it means regulated. It is your ability to be present in the moment, even in the challenge, even if that is an active challenge for you, your ability to practice that, they will respond to. Because whether you like it or not, whether you intend it or not, you are, as the leader, you are the one who sets the emotional weather for the team. So consider that. But we also need to consider, for leaders, for teams, there is an additional challenge these days, even remote teams, and they vary depending on one's boundaries, depending on what's normalized, depending on what's permitted, depending on culture, depending on all of these things. But, fucking today, people are constantly dealing with constant notifications, whether they are on the computer or on their phone or on their watch. You can, and this is where you can make choices and set things. But if you have the culture where you must respond constantly or you must be constantly in touch, that is where it can get in the way. But constant notifications, information overload, there's a lot. Back-to-back meetings. It's really frustrating as a facilitator working with teams who are just continually stressed by the system, and the system is the normalization of back-to-back meetings. You're fighting a fire that has a constant fuel source, and that becomes impossible. No amount of water can change the amount of gas that is coming out, keeping that fire ignited. So back-to-back meetings are global uncertainty and what that means in so many different contexts. Global uncertainty. And task switching and cognitive switching. So this is not just for people who are neurodivergent, but I also know for me, task switching is really, really hard. And that's been measured. Like, that was a thing that was measured for me that said, oh, you struggle with this. So that was validating on one part, but it's also, because it helped me go, oh yeah, of course, that's why these things are challenging for me. So then I can begin to the best of my ability to structure my days to the best of my ability so that I'm not just task switching, because it takes my brain a lot of energy, which means it uses a lot of energy that I could keep otherwise for other things, to switch tasks. So if I'm having to just jump between two things, or being interrupted, or all of this sort of stuff, for example. So that can increase the level of overwhelm for people because it is using their mental resources or emotional resources sometimes, most times. So again, this is where it comes back to your leadership. Your job as a leader is not to be the best person technically at whatever the industry is. Your job is to also, in how you communicate, actively at least try to reduce cognitive load, and actively at least try to regulate your emotional tone. Again, you don't have to be calm, but you can be clear, you can be regulated. I really want to get this point across. A regulated nervous system does not necessarily equal a calm nervous system. They are not necessarily the same things, because we regulate because things aren't necessarily one way. And that is life. We're always going to have this little, but we have to be really, really aware that calm is not necessarily the goal, and calm does not mean regulated either. So back to reducing the cognitive load. There's a lot of information in this one. Back to reducing the cognitive load. One thing you can do practically, there's going to be a couple. One thing you can do practically is simplify your message, not dumb it down, not remove things that are really important, right? So some things are really important. And here's where I'm going to suggest something potentially controversial, especially as a communications nerd. Instead of long explanation, multiple goals, complicated instructions, you can focus on key things. What matters? What happens next? Who owns it? So those things, this is the potentially controversial element. If you need to simplify it, you could actually just put it in an email in dot points. I know that seems cold. I know that seems, we got to be friendly. And look, I'm someone who uses emojis or smiley faces or whatever the fuck in emails. I don't overdo it with the emojis, obviously, but I will most often use a smiley face in an email. I am a millennial woman. You can pry it from my cold, dead hands. And sometimes it is simpler. If I find myself getting wordy, not usefully, but wordy, I will simplify and just dot point it. I might even have a heading. What matters? Blah, blah, blah. Whether it's a sentence, if it's just a sentence or two, or dot points. What happens next? Blah, blah, blah. Insert the answer here. Who owns it? And that, we're using the example of email format. That makes a difference. That helps people to see where the point is. It cleans it up for them. And I know people are like, but I gotta be talking as if I'm friendly. Oh, look, yes. And sometimes you just need to do the kind thing and to deliver the fucking information without adding to the cognitive load, without forcing someone to read through word salad. And I say this as someone who often can deliver word salad. I am a culprit here, as much of a victim. So let it be really simple. It could be, all right, here are the 3 priorities for the week. Chunk the information, dot point it out, then add your smiley face. Or you could say it at the beginning. And look, I'm probably not speaking to people who are necessarily worried about this, but if you want to make sure there's still personality, which I do think is important, we don't want to make it cold and abrupt. You could be like, hey, I'm just going to simplify it here for you. Like, I'm just going to lay it out in dot points because it's easier for my brain to explain as well. Because we're all in this together. We're all in this together. So, one thing you can do. Another one, kind of slow the emotional pace. Let me explain this. When people are overwhelmed, that quick rushing speech, and I know I speak quickly, but when we're rushed, when it feels like it's being pushed, that can increase anxiety. It can signal urgency or panic. If you come into a room and you are rushing your speech rather than talking it through, that can increase the anxiety. So you, as a leader, you might take a breath yourself and go, okay, so there's a lot happening right now. Let's focus on the next step. Lovingly redirect. See, gently redirect. We don't need to solve everything today. Notice how there's a pause, there's an acknowledgement, there's a slowing down, not of the message, not of the information, not drawing it out, making it tedious as well, but there's a slowing down, there's a pause, there's a breath. That can really help you, but it can really help your team as well. So consider that. Then, and this is kind of linked to the first one as well, reduce ambiguity. So when people are overwhelmed, when they're unclear, they can ruminate, they can make up stories, they can be, let their anxiety take the wheel. Work gets duplicated, or there's like a decision paralysis, so the opposite almost. So you can communicate clear outcomes, clear timeframes, who owns the decision. You can communicate that to the team so not everyone is rushing off with that anxiety just to get something done, and then it's double or triple handled. So you can do that. So it could be, instead of vaguely going, well, let's explore some ideas, direct what that looks like, what the process of that is. Let's explore some ideas. Or bring 2 options to our next meeting on Tuesday and we'll decide together. Each of us bring 2 options. That could be a really good way to reduce the ambiguity by kind of guiding them and going, all right, here's the framework of what we're going to work with. This is what each of your job is. And as always, work on practicing regulation practices for yourself first. Does not mean you need to be calm all the time. Does not mean you need to feel great about things. Does not mean we're pretending anything. But before communicating, just check in and go, am I rushing this? Am I tense? Am I reactive? What are the key points I'm actually trying to get across? Not necessarily all the noise that might be in my head, because you are still human too. So if you check in with these things, because these are things your team feels, these are things that you can do. So as I have mentioned, take a breath. Take a breath before speaking. Pause before responding. Go, let me consider that moment, for example. Name the situation clearly. Naming situations, just naming it, going, you know what, I think everyone's feeling a bit of pressure right now. Let's pause, let's take a breath for a moment and take it step by step and then lay out the steps. You leading that kind of regulated communication makes a massive difference. So there is that. So that is all to say, in an age of overwhelm, I'm sure there's a song in that, in an age of overwhelm, sometimes a communication problem in an organization is not actually an information problem. Sometimes we got to check ourselves first. So it could be a cognitive overload problem. It could be an emotion regulation problem. So what you can do is focus on simplicity, steadiness, clear direction. That's all you need to do. That is all you need to do. So from here, consider, especially if you're a leader, consider, where is your team showing signs of this overload right now or overwhelm? Are you, maybe it's for the next step that you're doing, are you adding clarity or complexity in the email you're about to send or the phone call you're about to make? And what emotional tone are you bringing to the conversation? Try not to overthink that one too much, because we can be like, oh, I need to just, that's where the emails become a problem and complicated and wordy. But really consider, in an overwhelmed world, the leaders who communicate with steadiness and clarity are the ones people trust to lead them. And that's where it comes. So with that, hope that is helpful. It feels helpful even for me, just those steps. And take that with you, and I will see you next week.